stewardship, and a commitment to excellence. I'm proud that the Iowa Department of Corrections has maintained that level of standard through collaboration, quality improvement, training, reentry, and resource management. Being on the forefront of innovation and practice, the Department of Corrections continues to push the envelope to be the best correctional department in the country. In order to accomplish our goals, we need to continue to embed practices and policies that are supported by research. The IDOC is making significant strides to thread evidence-based practices through practice. The Lieutenant Governor mentioned apprenticeships, and if I may, I'd like to personalize this a little bit. We got a letter from an offender who was released from prison on January 30th of 2017, and he had a job the next day. He sent a letter to the supervisor of the apprenticeship program and said, "Going to prison was the best thing that could have happened to me. I've been working my job since one day after my release. My welding apprenticeship that I accomplished while in prison allowed me to start as a third-year apprentice. That will put my pay at $18 or $19 an hour with a union pension started. After I finish the apprenticeship, I will have the opportunity to make over $30 an hour. I was able to come in a job that people dream about because of the initiative I took in prison. The apprenticeship program is a perfect way to get persons' feet in the door toward a career. The apprenticeship program and people who participate are going to help build the future for this country. It helped me learn to have confidence in my ability by giving the determination to be a productive member of society through a career. Through the apprenticeship program, you have saved my life and made me a new man with my outlook on life." I think it's stories like that that you hear that make us committed to continuing this work. One person's story can become a multitude of people telling the same story. As the governor mentioned, we've been involved in the statewide recidivism reduction initiative for 2 years since the grant started. And the things that we did when we developed that grant was looking at what best practices were, looking at policy and procedure, making sure that everything that the evidence tells us was part of what we implemented into our daily work. So we've moved away from the grant to say, if that's that important, then let's make that the way that the Department of Corrections works. So we're focusing on correctional work from the institutions and, more importantly, uniting the institutions and community-based corrections to create the Iowa corrections system. Because what happens in community-based corrections informs what happens in the institutions. And the more we consistently apply these practices that evidence says reduce recidivism, the greater our likelihood of reducing recidivism are, and we make our communities safer. We're also taking a step into something the governor mentioned called evidence-based resourcing. We continue to streamline and maximize processes through staffing analysis and quality improvement. We've conducted a staffing analysis and time study in the institutions and CBC to know what and how many staff that we need, and then to be able to make budget requests and also to craft our budget based on those needs. We think that by doing this, we're able to say, this is the investment that you can make in corrections, and with this investment, we can give you this level of public safety. As the Lieutenant Governor noted, collaboration is a key element of what we're doing in the Department of Corrections. We see ourselves as a partner in making our communities safer. Every executive branch agency has something in their mission that says creating success for Iowans, making our communities safer, opportunities for all. We think what we're trying to do in the Department of Corrections directly fits into what other mission and agencies are saying. We also recognize that behavioral health is an issue for the Department of Corrections, and we partnered with the National Alliance on Mental Illness Iowa chapter to provide peer-to-peer training in our institutions so that we can begin to help offenders with mental illness create coping skills and find ways to get support when they are returned to the community. We just recently received a grant from the Arnold Foundation to implement a public safety assessment, which will happen at the pretrial level. That gives us information about who is a good risk to go back from jail during the pendency of the trial, so they can maintain their work and maintain involvement with their family, but they aren't a risk to the community. That being said, with Correctional Worker Week, I would just like to acknowledge the good work that staff does in the Department of Corrections every day. We have more than 3,500 employees in the Department of Corrections. There are so many things that they do every day to make our community safer that you don't know about. Sometimes with corrections, it's a bad story that gets the headlines. But I can tell you, when we look at our roadmap, which includes ensuring successful opportunities for people that are in prison or on community-based supervision, that reentry is our process, that evidence-based practices are our tools, but most importantly, staff are our greatest resource. So Correctional Worker Week is a good time to acknowledge that. We try to do that every day, and thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Jerry, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'd open it for questions on this subject first.
Governor, the Department of Corrections has at least $5 million less than it did 12 months ago. I'm curious with this effort that the director mentioned, kind of pushing the envelope to being the best department in the country. How do you balance that?
Well, I would point out that back in 2011, the budget for the Department of Corrections was $354 million. For the next fiscal year, it's going to be $377 million. And the amount of inmates in the prison has dropped by 511. So I really am pleased that the Department of Corrections is looking for better, more efficient ways to manage its resources. And they're focusing on evidence-based approaches. And you know, when I was at Des Moines University, we were trying to do that same thing in medicine, trying to move from the old system of see it done and then do it this way again to more an evidence-based system, which is more scientific and is designed to, in fact, reduce recidivism and to see, and you've heard the example of the apprenticeships actually helping people get the skills so they're employable and so they don't go back to prison. So I think that corrections should be commended for doing the job that they're doing. Also, the collaboration between the parole board and corrections is why we've seen that reduction of over 500 prisoners.
Iowa's recidivism rate went up last year. I'm curious.
It had gone down a couple of, you're going to have some ups and downs, but we saw a modest increase last year after we'd had several years of reduction. So, again, we're going to continue to analyze that. That's what the evidence-based system is all about, looking at what works and analyzing where things have gone right and where mistakes have been made.
The follow-up to that for the director, do you have more information at this point as to what may have caused the increase?
We continue to look at that very closely. One of the things that we recognize is that as we release more people, the likelihood of a greater number of people coming back to prison increases. We also have seen an increase in what we call technical violations that if we didn't intervene with good correctional intervention at that point, there may have been an additional crime.
Lieutenant Governor Reynolds, what's your administration, Branstad administration, are there any discussions underway, maybe in your Department of Public Safety, or will there be, about gun safety after that death of the officer?
Well, they'll.
That he was, the perpetrator managed to get the weapon off
Yeah.
the officer. Are there discussions on
Well, anytime there's an incident like this, the department does a full review of the policies and what was followed and what was not. And so we'll wait until the department does a full review of that, and we'll stay in conversation with them as they work through that. And then we'll see what needs to take place from there.
And obviously, this will be done by Pottawatomie County
Right.
because it was Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Department. But also, we have some really good training that goes on at the Law Enforcement Academy. And the officers were graduates of the Law Enforcement Academy. But after you have a tragic incident like this, I think it's important to look at it and analyze, what went wrong and how you can prevent these kind of things from happening in the future. It's a terrible tragedy, and we really feel bad for the families that are affected, and obviously the whole department. Law enforcement has had really a tough go here lately. and they've been targeted in instances. We've had, you know what happened here in Des Moines, and you've seen it happen across the country, and this is just the latest incident. Other questions?
The students in some of the university presidents today will talk about tuitions and the state is kind of lost its priority for higher education. Cutting the lines is critical. Legislature and your administration.
Well, I recommended an increase that if the revenue had held up, I'm sure the legislature would have approved. But the March revenue estimate was reduced again and was reduced substantially. And by law, the legislature can only spend 99% of that estimate. So the legislature did what it had to do. It wasn't easy and it was painful. But I respect the fact that we had 2.5 years, we had no increase in tuition. And you go back to the Vilsack administration, there were years that were double-digit increases as much as 17 and 18% a year. I'm very cognizant of the significant cost to families and students. I didn't get my last student loan paid back till I was governor the first time. So I do recognize, but even with the increase that they're talking about now, it's still 5%. It's not a double-digit increase that we saw in previous administrations.
I'm just going to add to that too. We continually work with our educators to make sure that when students leave high school, they're prepared for post-secondary education so we can reduce the amount of remediation that students might need, increasing the cost of college. In addition, we lead the nation in the number of dual enrollment courses that are offered by our Iowa students, and that really helps us control the cost of college also. So whether we're looking at a 2-year, a 4-year certification or apprenticeship, the more that we can prepare our young people sooner rather than later, that also helps us reduce the cost of college moving forward.
Pipeline is up and running this
Right.
weekend. We never had the types of protests that were as big as the ones that were, but looking back, I mean, are you glad at how it moved here in Iowa and where you?
I think it was handled in a very careful and judicious manner by the utility board and by local law enforcement and with the help of the state. This is something that I think is going to improve safety. When you transport crude oil by rail, you can have some tragic accidents that have occurred in other states that have cost lives. We think that this is a better and safer way to do it. We have thousands of miles of pipeline through the state of Iowa. Many of them are much older, and the newer approach that was used in this pipeline, I think, will be a lot safer.
There are some bills still on your desk that you haven't signed.
Right.
For instance, the fail first budgets, fireworks, and medical marijuana. Are you planning on signing this anytime soon?
Well, my goal is to try to get through all of those bills this week. So we have a very ambitious schedule to review all the bills, including the appropriation bills. Some of them I think we've even set for dates for signing. I think fireworks bill is tomorrow. And we have a number of appropriation bills that we'll be reviewing. But my hope, my goal would, even though we have a deadline of the 22nd of May, is to complete it this week. So stay tuned. We're going to work hard on all of this, and we're reviewing all the bills and all the items in the appropriation bills.
Can we anticipate any vetoes?
Well, it's too early to predict that, but we are carefully, as we always do, reviewing every single item in the appropriation bill and all of the other bills that have been approved.
Do you have any clear timeline for possible confirmation? I know the Senate Appropriations Committee is going to take up your case tomorrow.
Yes, well, you got the news.
That's
That is, it's going to be, well, as you know, last week we had the hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. They submitted some additional questions, which we answered over the weekend. And they have now set the vote in committee for tomorrow. Senator Grassley tells me that he thinks the full Senate will likely take it up the week after. We aren't sure about that, but we do know there has been a vote scheduled for tomorrow. with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on my confirmation. So that's progress.
Can you tell us about the follow-up questions they wanted?
A lot of them were some of the similar ones to I answered, issues involving human rights, the South China Sea, North Korea. But a lot of them were somewhat repetitive of the questions that were actually asked at the hearing. But I answered all of the questions, and we submitted that over the weekend.
You haven't gone through anything like this, gone through a million elections, but do you have any butterflies today? Did you get ready for this?
Not really. I had a few butterflies going into the hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I'd watched Secretary of State Tillerson's hearing. I'd watched the one for Gorsuch for the Supreme Court, and fortunately mine wasn't quite as tough as theirs, but I was ready, and I did meet individually with many of the senators and virtually all of the members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee before, and I think that was helpful. And also Stephanie Gruen with our DC staff, and actually Michael Bougelo was with me also for the hearing. And my wife and two of my three children were there. A number of other friends joined as well. So, and we did get to go into the hearing room the day before. They turned on the bright lights, and I got a chance to kind of practice my opening statement. So all of those things help. I even put it in big font like I do with the state of the state. So
Like I do. This question is actually for Lieutenant Governor Reynolds. There's obviously movement in Congress over the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. And obviously the version bill right now in the House, it's unclear where it's going to go. But the idea is that they're moving to the House.
Yeah.
At least the House version has different bits about allowing insurers to charge higher premiums to some individuals with pre-existing conditions. So I'm curious, are you going to support a measure that scales back any Medicaid expansion in Iowa?
Well, first of all, the same thing applies to the process in Washington, D.C. that applies to the legislative process in Iowa. This is a long ways from done, but I am proud of the House of Representatives for finding consensus and to move it forward so that they were able to get it to pass the Congress and now headed over to the Senate where they'll take a look at it, and it won't look the same, I'm sure, when they get done with it. We're going to continue to talk to our congressional delegation. You know, Obamacare is unaffordable, unsustainable, unworkable. It is collapsing. It's essential that we do something to make sure that Iowans have an opportunity to purchase health insurance in the individual market. So we are paying very close attention to what's happening, and we're going to continue to work with the Senate and Congress to get something that will ensure that Iowans have coverage, because the way it stands right now, because Obamacare is collapsing, we're not going to have, there's 80,000 Iowans that potentially might not have any coverage at all. So that's some of the areas that we need to focus on. Well, I'm not going to speculate because we don't know. This is part of the process. They're moving it forward. And so we're going to continue to work with them. We'll see what's available, but they are offering some flexibility. They put some things into the bill, I think, that helped get it passed. Now the Senate will take a look at it, and they'll probably, change it. It's not going to look completely like it does right now, and we'll continue to be involved throughout this process.
You're asking more about the Medicaid part of it, the Iowa Health and Wellness Plan. Let me explain, because we went to HHS and to CMS to get a waiver for our program. The person that helped us get that done, her name is Seema Verma. She is now the head of CMS. We feel very confident with her and with the new secretary of HHS, Dr. Price, that we have got some people that really understand this, that support the flexibility that we asked for, which we had to fight for in the previous administration. So we think maintaining what we have should be very easy. In fact, we think we'll get even more flexibility to make it better going forward.
But I mean, they're still working, and that's what we did ask for. So, and we actually got an opportunity to present before the Judiciary Committee to ask for specific things that would give us the flexibility with the Medicaid program that we have.
Right.
So
So-
they've been very willing to work with us. as
Yeah,
we
and,
move
and
through the
I'm saying
process.
Dr. Price has been, he also met when the governors were in for the winter meeting.
Yeah.
Met with all the governors and answered a lot of questions, very knowledgeable. Seema Verma comes from Indiana. They did something similar to what we did. So we feel very confident. The lieutenant governor pointed out, under the present Obama system, basically, if you're an individual policyholder, there is no, all of the insurance companies have pulled out because they can't make it.
Yeah.
It's unaffordable and unsustainable. I said that from the beginning. And Iowa is one of the first, some states are down to one choice. I think in 94 counties, we're down to 0 choices.
Sorry, get the last question. We gotta wrap up. How confident are you the Supreme Court will do with the abortion issue?
Well, I never try to predict what the court's going to do. I think, they're going through the normal procedural thing they do. I would point out it's only a portion of the bill that is subject to this request for an injunction, and that is the waiting period. The 20 weeks is not subject to the lawsuit. So we're very hopeful that it'll be approved.